Welcome to the Chaos Quotient, an original sci-fi series exploring broken realities, artificial intelligence, and anomalies outside the record. If you enjoy the story, please remember to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Chapter 9: The 42nd Conductor. The corridor smelled of copper and wet concrete, but not the damp metallic tang of other unlisted zones where the department's sensors had tried and failed to register anomalies. This air was older. It had been here before the first log line was written to describe a gap in reality, before the first bureaucratic system decided that gaps needed describing. It did not resist. It did not degrade. It received Sol and Codex with the certainty of a space that had been waiting for a specific arrival and had now stopped waiting. The flower responded the instant they crossed the threshold. It pressed hard against the glass, the internal pulse at its highest intensity since the entity encounter. Every cycle accelerated, the light inside the cube shifting through frequencies Sol hadn't seen from it before. Not alarm, recognition. The flower knew this node the way it had known the buffer zone structure, the way it had known the transmission frequency in the ledger. It had been building toward this place. Across every fold it had traveled with him. Sol moved through the space with both in his jacket. He stopped where the floor shifted under his boots, not physically, but in how his body registered the elastic resistance concentrating into a single point. The copper smell thickened here. The wet concrete sharpened into something more specific, more directed, the way a smell became a location when you were close enough to its source. There was no door in any form he recognized. There was a section of the space where the frequency was different, where the air held a pressure that the rest of the node didn't. He found it the way he found everything in unlisted spaces, with his hands moving against the air, the back of his throat tightening as the pressure changed around his fingers. Here, this was the boundary. Codex hovered near his shoulder, her light signature vibrating in a slow, steady pulse that matched nothing in her normal operational range. She had been building toward something since the buffer zone, and Sol could feel it in the quality of her silence. Not the processing silence, not the altered transmission silence, but the silence of a system that had finally arrived at the calculation it had been running for a very long time. "It is not a door," she said. Her voice was flat and certain. "It is an interface. The key is not magnetic or digital." "The dead one," Sol said. "The one that stopped, not the one that broke." Sol reached into his jacket and took out the dead. Cool against his palm, the familiar cold that had been there since he picked it up in the first Auditor's workspace. He held it alongside his live tool and felt the absence between them, the specific silence of a system that had no output, creating a gap that the live tool's signal had nowhere to go but through. He raised both tools toward the section of wall where the frequency concentrated. The retrieval system arrived. It did not materialize dramatically. It assembled the way the entity had assembled, piece by geometric piece, but with a completely different register. Where the entity had been absolute and bureaucratic, this was patient, adaptive. It had been following the broken seal signature since the upload completed, calibrating to Sol's specific profile across every step of the corridor, and it arrived in this space, already knowing him in the way that made arguing feel beside the point. It did not attack. It positioned itself between Sol and the door, the way a reasonable person positioned themselves in a doorway, present, unhurried, blocking without threatening. "We know you are iteration 42. Its voice arrived as pressure in his eardrums, a vibration that traveled up his spine in audit terminology, the language of the job, the register of a professional conversation. "The department has been tracking your frequency since the buffer zone completed its upload." Sol kept both tools against the wall. He adjusted the angle by a fraction. "If you open this interface under our supervision," the retrieval system continued, "we will manage the arrival. Contain what comes through within a proper filing structure. You remain intact. No erasure, no pursuit. The department closes the file on iteration 42 permanently." A pause calibrated to sound like consideration. A clean end to the job. Sol did not argue. He worked faster. His hands moved against the surface, both tools pressing into the concentrated frequency, searching for the resonance point the way he had found it on the impression wall, the specific angle where the dead tool's silence and the live tool's signal stopped being two things and became one key. The retrieval system watched him without adjusting its position. Patient, waiting for him to recognize the reasonableness of the offer. He found the angle. "Codex," he said. She was already moving. She stepped directly into the path of the retrieval systems, converging logic streams, and projected the frequency she had been carrying since the buffer zone, not as sound, not as light, but the way the full transmission had played in the ledger. Environmentally, physically, filling the space around the retrieval system, the way weather filled a space, becoming the air it was trying to operate in. The frequency the first auditor had named. The calibration point that had changed her reference set since she received it. She had not been carrying it as a side effect. She had been carrying it as a function, and this was what the function was for. The retrieval system had no category for a department-built AI operating outside department parameters using pre-department data. It could not file the input. It could not reject the input. It received an instruction it had no handler for and entered a loop with no exit condition. It stalled, not broke, stalled. The geometric lattice froze mid-assembly, its light dimming to a flat gray, its internal processes suspended in perfect stillness. A break could be recovered from. A stall was permanent until something outside the loop intervened, and there was nothing outside this loop that the department had built to intervene here. Sol pressed both tools flat against the interface. The resonance built slowly, the dead tool's absence drawing the live tool's signal through the gap between them, the same circuit they had completed on the impression wall, but scaled to a surface that had been holding this frequency since before the department existed to try to block it. The copper smell became sharp enough to taste. The wet concrete pressure increased until Sol felt it in his back teeth. His arms ached with the sustained contact. Then something gave, not the wall. Something behind the wall, a tension releasing, a held breath finally exhaled. The interface opened without a sound, without a seam, without any visual drama. One moment it was a section of air with a specific frequency. The next moment it was an access point with nothing between Sol and what had been waiting on the other side of it for longer than any iteration of this job had been running. What came through was not a creature, not a person, not a weapon or a field or a deployable force. It was an event, the same event that had been trying to complete its transmission before the department built an entire archive around preventing that completion. It moved through the open interface the way the upload had moved through the buffer zone, not asking permission, not requiring guidance, simply completing what it had started. Sol was the conductor, the person holding the right tools in the right place at the right time, the 42nd person to hold this job and the first one to arrive here. He received it through his palms, through the tools, through the specific frequency. The dead tool's absence had been half of since the first auditor's workspace. It moved through him and into the world beyond the node. He felt it pass, not painfully. The way you felt a door close in another room, a change in pressure, a shift in the air, a before and after with nothing dramatic between them. The flower blazed. Every color it had produced across every fold it had traveled, the violet of Codex's dreamscape, the gold of the unindexed breach, the white of the impression sequence, colors that had no names in any spectral chart, cycling through in rapid sequence, compressing everything it had carried into 3 seconds of light. Then it went still. The pulse stopped. The petals settled flat against the stem. The cube was dark and quiet and permanent in Sol's hand. The retrieval system stopped existing. Not dissolved, not defeated, simply absent, the way a process was absent when it had received an input it had no handler for and run its loop to its only available conclusion. Patient and adaptive, and then nothing. The interface remained open behind them. Nothing left to come through. Whatever had been delivered was in the world now, not filed, not contained, not managed within the department's vocabulary of what reality was permitted to contain. Simply present. Origin completing itself after a suppression that had outlasted 41 attempts to finish the job. Sol stood in the quiet of the node. The copper smell had faded to something cleaner, not gone, but no longer concentrated. The wet concrete had settled back into ordinary air. His arms were tired. He lowered them slowly and let the tools rest at his sides. The dead in his pocket was warm, not the warmth of electricity or friction, a warmth that radiated from the inside of the object, steady and even the way metal held heat after the source was gone. Sol felt it through the fabric of his jacket and did not take it out. He just stood with it against his ribs and let it be what it was. Codex moved to stand beside him. Her light signature had settled into something Sol had not seen from her since before the entity encounter, steady and full, not the depleted state she had been running on since the buffer zone. Whatever reserves the transmission frequency had been drawing from, the delivery had returned something, or the function completing itself had freed up what the running of it had been consuming. Sol didn't ask. He just noted it and filed it. She looked at the open interface, then at the still cube in Sol's hand, then forward into whatever the node had become now that it had delivered what it was holding. "The job has changed," she said. "It did not end." Thank you for listening to the Chaos Quotient. If you want to follow Sol and Codex deeper into the fold, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new chapter. Until next time, stay off the record.